Dr. Stephanie Diez Morel is an assistant professor of graduate social work at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. She is the co-lead for the American Psychiatric Association's DSM Gaming Disorder Task Force. She's authored numerous scientific presentations and journal articles, as well as appeared in the media on a variety of radio, podcasts, and news outlets to discuss the topics of addictions, gaming disorder, and other technology-based addictions. In 2013, Dr. Diez Morel founded Reboot and Recover, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing education, prevention, treatment, and research on gaming disorder and other technology-based addictions. She's received numerous awards in recognition of her work, including the Most Next Award for Innovation, awarded by the AICP Foundation in recognition of her problematic gaming prevention work with Reboot and Recover, and the New York University NIH Visiting Mentor Development Award for Addiction Research. I've heard Stephanie speak on gaming disorder. Personally, it's an area that I'm kind of tinkering with. I don't feel I'm at that competency level yet in my practice to do this. So I always find this interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of what you have to say today, Stephanie. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robbie. And hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So as mentioned, my name is Dr. Stephanie Diez Morel. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a master certified addiction professional. I also have an international gaming disorder certification and am a board approved clinical consultant for the IGCCP. So if any of you are interested in learning more or seeking your certification through the IGCCB, and looking for a board-approved clinical consultant for supervision hours, I'm available. Oh, I love this picture. I find it so calming, and always like to try to begin my presentations with a bit of a mindful moment. So before we begin, I would like to first acknowledge you for taking the time to attend this presentation and to actively learn during a time in which our lives and routines have shifted in an ever-changing world. And so much occurs in our lives and the lives of others who we share this journey of life with every day. And that impact that it has on each of you and your loved ones can vary, but yet we all are collectively navigating through many of life's challenges on our own ships. So I would like to invite you to just take a moment and, knowing all of this, acknowledge your efforts in being here today and in seeking to learn and striving for more. If you feel that it is helpful to you at this time, then I'd invite you to just take a deep breath in and then exhale and ground yourself to this day, to this moment, and to being present. Now, I'm committed to using a trauma-informed teaching and clinical practice approach. So I'd just like to announce a trigger warning. Some of the material presented today and some of the ways in which the material might be presented may be upsetting or temporarily overwhelming at times. Self-awareness and good self-care can go a long way in recognizing and minimizing distress and bouncing back from it. And we know that helping professionals might be an increased probability of experiencing some of this uncomfortableness or feeling overwhelmed. So just make sure to do periodic self-check-ins on how the information and the ways in which the information is delivered and discussed are affecting you. And if at any time you do feel in distress, I invite you to just take a deep breath in, to recenter and ground yourself, and know that you are free to join us once you feel ready. All right, so Robbie presented plenty of information about who I am, but just to give a brief synopsis again, I founded Reboot and Recover, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission to provide solutions for a balanced living in a technology-driven world. And since 2013, the focus has been on prevention, education, intervention, treatment, and research. And all of this work has come together with my work as a professor and a researcher as well. And the information that I'm presenting to you today is based off of the work of others, but much of it is also based off of my own work and experiences as a clinician who also works on the side of prevention and education. Oh, let me see if this works. Well, sorry about that. I was trying to get the avatar to move. Apparently it doesn't want to move. So today's learning objectives is we're going to first begin by trying to create an awareness on the facts and clinical features of gaming disorder and the continuum of gaming behaviors. We'll talk about the psychological, physiological, social, and environmental issues, so psychosocial issues and beliefs that are often associated with gaming and gaming disorder. Then we'll identify some co-occurring mental health issues to be aware of and to screen for at intake or initial sessions, as these often are mental health issues or disorders that are co-occurring with gaming disorder. And we'll also identify some valid screening measures to help you assess for gaming disorder in your own clinical practice. Robbie, could you please launch poll 1?
Sure. Let me get in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so here, just to get to know you all a little bit more, we have a poll asking about your own behavior with video games. So do you play games? And a couple of choices there to select from. All right, it looks like the two most popular answers so far are no, I choose not to play games, or yes, I play every once in a while.
Everybody's answering pretty quickly.
Yeah, we've got 25, I think. Is that everyone? No, we've got 29 participants minus you and me.
Yeah.
27.
We'll give them T-10. Would you like me to post the results here?
It
Let's
looks
go
like we got
ahead.
everyone,
Sure.
27.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, so there we have it. It looks like there's about 37% that say they choose not to play video games, 33 who play every once in a while, and 22 who don't play them anymore, but they did when they were younger. All right. And a few of you who say, yes, I play video games often. Great. So thank you, everyone. That helps me to go into either more or less discussion based on the presentation. So first and foremost, we'll begin with the definition of what is problematic video gaming. And problematic video gaming is the terminology that I most often refer to when I'm researching and discussing the behavior, especially if it hasn't reached gaming disorder proportions, because gaming disorder is a clinical diagnosis, and so certain criteria must be met in order to truly identify gaming disorder. But, when speaking with others about this behavior or really any problematic behaviors or potentially addictive behaviors, it's important to model language and use terminology that reduces stigma and that can increase understanding. As we know, words can have a very strong impact on an individual. It can elicit an emotional response that can lead to someone being willing to open up in your work with them, or words can also impact someone and have them emotionally respond by shutting down, right, or building walls. So using terminology that is the most inclusive and is less stigmatizing and acknowledges the extent of the behavior is an important part of this work as well. The term addiction often comes with many cultural and societal implications and can often trigger unconscious biases like stigmas. So I would recommend that you refrain from using the term addiction, such as video game addiction, when working with clients. Instead, we can use problematic gaming. So when we discuss gaming disorder with others, whether it's a client or a group of community members or youth, to help set the tone of the conversation, we can begin by acknowledging problematic gaming or at-risk gaming as more encompassing terms. Now, in the literature, there is an ongoing lack of consensus in terminology that is debated among a variety of interdisciplinary experts on the subject. And this, of course, adds to the confusion, but we do have a bit of some light being shed on that. So in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association published in the Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, they included internet gaming disorder as a behavioral addiction that we colloquially, refer to again as an addiction. And the DSM-5 included this in section 3, which is a new section they developed for diagnostic considerations warranting further study. Essentially, in 2013, the DSM-5 was acknowledging that gaming disorder existed and there was evidence of this being a problematic behavior and causing significant clinical impairment in the lives of others. However, the majority of the research at the time was done overseas, mainly in countries such as, in various countries in the continent of Asia and throughout Europe. And so the research in the United States was not as strong as it is now, nearly 10 years later. So in 2018, more recently, the World Health Organization defined gaming disorder. So they removed that word of internet gaming disorder. And that's important because initially naming internet gaming disorder included the stipulation that the behavior was only problematic if video games were played online. However, we know now through research and of course, both with clinical cases and large studies, that the internet is not an integral component of developing gaming disorder. So now the World Health Organization has included gaming disorder as a formal, billable, diagnosable disorder in the ICD-11 under section 6, which is mental, behavioral, or neurodevelopmental disorders. And that section contains a subcategory of disorders due to substance use or addictive behaviors, where you can find both gambling disorder and gaming disorder now. All right, so can you please, Robbie, launch poll 2?
Sure. Let's get to poll 2.
All right. So how familiar are you with the DSM-5? I've mentioned it quite a bit, so I'd like to know how familiar you are, so you can either go over the content in more detail or a little less. All right, we've got 26 people. There we are.
Okay, I think we got everybody. Thank you, everybody. You're answering very quickly today. There you have it. And I'll share the results here.
All right, so it looks like most of you answered the first response, which is you're familiar and use it for diagnostic criteria or to, identify diagnostic criteria. And only a few, 25%, have heard of it but don't use it. Great, that's going to help with the next portion. We can stop sharing that now. All right. So to understand what makes gaming a problem, we're going to review how to clinically assess for gaming disorder. And this criteria is in the DSM-5. And just this past month, the DSM also released an updated version of the DSM-5, which is the DSM-5-TR. And these criteria are the same. They have not changed. And the categorization of gaming disorder, being in section 3, of the DSM has also not changed. So the current criteria in the DSM-5-TR states that there needs to be persistent and recurrent use of video games, often with other players, leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. So those keywords there, right? Clinically significant impairment or distress can look different from one person to another, but we do see similarities in the behavioral patterns. And these are the 9 criteria that are listed here. In order to diagnose someone with gaming disorder, they have to meet at least 5 of the 9 criteria within a 12-month period. So the behavior should be something that you are seeing or the client is reporting has been occurring over at least a year period. So the criteria that are listed here, the first one is preoccupation with gaming, and the individual would be thinking about previous gaming activities, or they might be anticipating playing the next game, a lot of rumination, where they are really focused on gaming as the primary activity in their life or the dominant activity in their life. Now, we should also mention that preoccupation should be primarily with video games because this disorder is distinct from internet gambling, which is included under gambling disorder. So when you are assessing someone or considering if someone might have gaming disorder, the first thing would be to ask what type of games they play and ensure that the games they are primarily playing, that are primarily preoccupying their daily life and is the dominant activity in their life, is indeed a video game. Next are withdrawal symptoms. So we have to see some withdrawal symptoms when gaming is taken away. And these symptoms are typically described as emotional withdrawal symptoms. We're not seeing physiological withdrawal symptoms as we might for any of those of you who work with substance use disorders and often see physiological withdrawal symptoms primarily with alcohol usage or opiate usage where hospitalization is needed. With gaming disorder, the withdrawal symptoms are going to be the psychological symptoms that we see, like irritability, anxiety, sadness, inability to sleep well, right, due to anxiety usually or irritability. These are all withdrawal symptoms. Oops. All right, and then we have tolerance over time. So this means that there is a need to spend increasing amounts of time engaged in gaming. I would like to critique this criteria a little bit and say not to give it too much importance because really the research has shown that when it comes to gaming, the behavior can be more cyclical rather than clear linear tolerance over time. This is another one of those criteria that was borrowed from substance use disorder diagnostic criteria, in which tolerance is something we see more because there is a physiological tolerance to certain substances. And of course, we have biological components to that because of the half-life of the substance that the individual is using. So for tolerance, just be a little weary of that, right? Might not be the greatest measure of determining a criteria for gaming disorder. Then we have unsuccessful attempts to control the participation in gaming. This can often look like the individual attempting on their own to stop playing games, or they might have an ultimatum to control their participation in games. Maybe their significant other is asking them to, or they have parents or other loved ones that have asked them to try to control the amount of time they're playing, so spending less time playing, spending less money in a game, these kinds of behaviors. And if they're unable to control that numerous times, then that would be one way to characterize this criteria. Loss of interests, and this is in previous hobbies and entertainment. And this loss of interest should be tied into or associated with the result of them wanting to spend more time gaming. So perhaps they were playing sports before, or they really enjoyed reading or writing or art, right? Any kinds of hobbies. I have a couple of clients who, prior to focusing on gaming as their main preoccupation of their time, were playing sports at a very competitive level. They were winning, state championships, and all of that ceased as soon as they started engaging in video games to a level where it became problematic. So continued use despite consequences, right? And this is knowing that they have those consequences. Often when it comes to behavioral addictions, one of the staples that we see with many individuals is that they are not aware of the consequences that their behavior is causing them, or they might be in denial of this consequence. So this is, of course, if they're continuing to use despite consequences and knowledge of them. So perhaps they are aware of the fact that they lost a scholarship to a university because they failed out of all of their classes after excessively playing video games and not going to class or doing work. Or perhaps they were written up or fired from a job because of their continuous video gaming behaviors and not being able to control or stop playing while they're at work. So these are examples of some consequences that they would be aware of. Deception with gaming. So this is, deceiving family members, deceiving loved ones, therapists about the amount of gaming that they're engaging in, about the amount of money they're spending on gaming, the effort they're spending on gaming, right? That kind of deception. Very often, one of the first steps when I work with clients is that the parents will attempt to minimize the gaming by setting limits for gaming in the house, and they'll turn off their wireless internet routers, right? They'll turn off the Wi-Fi, or they'll change the passwords, and then they have their children who will find ways around that. They will turn their phones into mobile hotspots and then use that to game, or they will reset the router completely, and that goes back to the password that was the password when you initially set up the router that's located inside of the setup book. So they have that password. So there's a number of ways that, what deceit might look like with gaming. Uses games to escape or relieve a negative mood. So for example, right, feelings of helplessness, guilt, or anxiety. So really using games as a way to escape. There's a lot of research supporting that as well. And the last criteria in the DSM-5 for gaming disorder is jeopardizing relationships. So this is having jeopardized or lost a significant relationship job, or an educational or career opportunity because of their participation in gaming. And I had mentioned, clients that have had quite a few who have lost scholarships and career opportunities, right, with their employers because of their excessive participation in gaming. So in order to diagnose gaming disorder, 5 out of these 9 criteria need to be causing clinically significant impairment in the person's life in order to meet criteria for a diagnosis of gaming disorder. And again, this is only non-gambling games that are included in this disorder. There is a specific current severity index that you can also give to those with this diagnosis. So you can diagnose gaming disorder as mild, gaming disorder moderate, or gaming disorder severe. And that will depend on the degree of disruption of normal daily living activities due to gaming. So for example, those who might have a gaming disorder mild diagnoses, those are individuals who might have less severe gaming disorder and may exhibit fewer symptoms and less disruption in their lives. And those with severe gaming disorder might have more or all symptoms and more severe psychosocial implications due to their gaming. All right. Oh, before I get to, well, I can launch poll 3. All right. Can we launch poll 3?
Absolutely. Let's see here. Okay. Here we go.
Wonderful. So this is now asking about the ICD-11, which I mentioned briefly. Let's just see how familiar you are so I know how in depth to go.
Just a couple more. We'll give you guys a couple more seconds and then we'll post the results.
All right, so there we have it. It seems like the majority, 57%, have heard of the WHO ICD-11, so that's the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases 11, just spelling out the acronym for those who might not know or have never heard of it. A few of you did say that. Great. Thank you for answering. So let's go over the criteria. As I had mentioned, this is the latest diagnostic criteria that we have for gaming disorder in the World Health Organization's ICD-11. And the coding for the ICD-11 went into effect at the beginning of this year, in January, the beginning of this year. So gaming disorder, according to the World Health Organization, is characterized by a pattern of persistent or recurrent gaming behavior, and that can be digital gaming, video gaming, and this behavior can be either online or offline, so that distinction is made. And gaming disorder is manifested by these 3 main criteria, which are first and foremost impaired control over gaming. This is a bit more broad than the criteria we have in the DSM. So what it means by impaired control over gaming would be the onset, the frequency, the intensity, the duration, the termination, or the context of gaming. There is also an increasing priority given to gaming. So this is showing that the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities aligns with that preoccupation that we mentioned that's listed in the DSM-5. And a continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. So for gaming disorder to be diagnosed according to the ICD-11, the behavior pattern has to be of sufficient severity to result in significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, or occupational, as well as other areas of functioning, right? So we're looking at those same keywords again, which is clinically significant impairment in psychosocial functioning, just to sum it up. For the ICD-11 criteria, the pattern of gaming behavior may be continuous or it can be episodic and recurrent over a period of at least 12 months, similar to the DSM-5. However, the World Health Organization does provide specification that this required duration of the behavior being observed over 12 months, that can be shortened. It can be shortened if all of the diagnostic criteria are met and if the symptoms are severe enough. So it's giving you some leeway there as clinicians to use your clinical mindset, right? As those who are helping professionals to use your judgment. All right. So now that we've gone over the definition, let's talk about what often co-occurs with gaming disorder. So what we tend to see are these 5 diagnoses often co-occur with gaming. Now, in my clinical experience, often the clients will come in with previous diagnoses, and they might already have a diagnosis of ADHD, OCD, depression, anxiety, or ASD. And just to specify what these acronyms are, right? ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. Depression can be all different diagnoses of depression. So those kind of run the spectrum. Anxiety, similar, right? Various diagnoses of anxiety, situational anxiety, and ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. So when we are working with individuals, if you have someone that comes in with some of these diagnoses, I would urge you to also explore a bit more about their gaming behaviors and see if perhaps gaming is something that might be problematic in their life and is starting to cause those clinically significant impairments in daily psychosocial functioning that we just talked about through those criteria by the American Psychiatric Association and by the World Health Organization. Now, this is a chart on the continuum of gaming behaviors. Although there is a straight arrow here, right, that kind of goes backwards and forwards, that's kind of the trajectory of where the behavior can go. So most individuals, really none, start gaming one day and then the very next day becomes gaming disorder, right? Really, it can begin as a leisure activity. This is where it begins for most individuals. And that leisure activity can then start going into an at-risk or problematic area before it reaches gaming disorder proportions. So as those who are interested in learning more about the behavior, when you are examining how your clients, how those that you work with, how they play games and the role that games have in their lives, also consider that there is a continuum of gaming behaviors, and the vast majority of individuals who are playing video games are doing so in one of these first 3 areas. So the possibility of an individual having gaming disorder is actually quite low, as most individuals who play games are doing so at a leisure level. Some might be at risk, or we're starting to see some of that impairment in their psychosocial functioning. Then we have, of course, problematic and gaming disorder. So to put that into some statistics and numbers, for those of you who like research and statistics, let's look at the likelihood of someone being diagnosed with gaming disorder by this wonderful study. This is a table from a research study published in 2021 by Drs. King, Del Fabio, Stevens, and Dorstein, and it's a systematic review and a meta-analysis. So that is a research study examining everything that has been published about prevalence rates of gaming disorder from populations across the globe. And the results from this large study suggest that global prevalence rates of gaming disorder is 3.05%, meaning that 3.05% of those in varying samples. So some of the research looked at community members, some looked particularly just at individuals who identify as gamers. So they went into a video game and collected the data there. And other samples from these research studies looked at people who were in treatment centers and met the criteria for gaming disorder. So from all these varying samples, they saw which ones of them met criteria for gaming disorder based on the assessment that they used. And overall, the number came out to 3.05. So to put that into perspective, current international prevalence rates for some substance use disorders is as low as 2.6%. And adolescent samples, as well as lower cutoff scores and smaller sample size, were also significant predictors of higher prevalence. So they did find higher prevalence in some of these studies amongst adolescents. And gaming disorder rates were approximately 2.5 to 1 in favor of those who identified as male versus those who identified as female. Now, as you can see here in this table, the study also examined prevalence by region, right? We have Europe, USA, and Asia. And we found that the US had a higher prevalence rate than Europe, 2.74% in the US versus 2.72, while Asia had the highest prevalence rate of gaming disorder at 5.08. All right. Robbie, can we launch the fourth poll?
Absolutely. Let's get number 4 here. I think this is our last one.
Yes. Okay, so here's a quizzical question. I will reveal that response shortly. So at what age do you think the average US video game player is? Since we're looking at prevalence rates, and I did mention that information about adolescents. What age do you think the average US video game player is? Got about 28 so far. Oh, just one more person, maybe.
Yeah.
There we
Okay,
are.
there we are. Yeah. This one surprised me, and I use this in my talks, by the way, Dr. Stephanie. So I'll let you share the result here.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad that you are sharing the information with others. It's important to know. All right. So as you can see here, it looks like we have the majority, 43% say 12 years old. And then we have 27% say 22, 23% say 18, and only 7%, 2 people said 31 years old. So let's see. I will go to the next. Oh. So the answer is 31 years old. The average age of a video game player in the US is 31 years old. And this is research from the Entertainment Software Association. They do every year a large study where they look at video game players in the United States. And the results from their research is that the average age is 31 years old. So maybe that might shift a bit of your perspective of what you think of when you think of a video game player and the work that you're doing and the individuals that individuals, families, and communities that you help through your work. We also know who else is gaming, right? So a bit more information, some more stats to keep in mind is that 227 million people in the US play video games. And video games transcend age and location of where a person lives. So there are video game players in all over the US, all over the world, globally as well. 75% of all US households have at least one person who plays video games, and 64% of US adults, as well as 70% of those under 18, report that they regularly play video games. As you can see here, of course, the nation of gamers, there are gamers, again, that span all ages, all various different abilities, and they are, perhaps different than what you might think of when you consider someone who is a gamer. All right, so why do we play? In order to properly clinically identify and screen for gaming disorder, it's also important that we understand why others play video games and what do they get from playing video games. So an entire generation of adults grew up on computers and smartphones. And even for those who didn't grow up on computers and smartphones, video games have become a part of their lives and of their children's and their grandchildren's lives. So games are uniquely able to connect us. They have the ability to entertain while can also inspire teamwork. There's some cooperation, sometimes a little competition. And what drives someone to play video games? Well, according to this large representative sample of US game players by the Entertainment Software Association, 80% of players say that video games provide mental stimulation. 79% say that video games can help them relax. They provide relaxation. And 65% say video games help them to connect with others as they can play either online or, as this picture is showing here, right, with someone in the same room. All right. And to also understand how video gaming can become problematic or disordered, it's important to also have a general understanding of the functionality of a video game. This is necessary to help us build empathy and understanding, which are key components to effectively helping someone who is experiencing any kind of problematic or addictive behavior. So video games were first and foremost developed and designed as a form of entertainment. And through their design and evolution over time, they have begun to serve many purposes for those who are involved in gaming. Nowadays, video games are rarely a solo experience played on a console alone. They can provide interactive socialization. Most video gaming is played with multiple players, either in person or virtually or both. The other players with whom one can engage can be immediate friends and family, to people who are halfway across the globe. And video games can be used as a tool for people of all ages to pursue peer relationships. And there are few restrictions regarding when one can interact with others, given that games are always available. Gamers can play together online, or they can interact on sites like Twitch and Discord at times of day where in-person socializing may not be feasible. During the time in which isolation was required, this form of socialization through video games has really increased substantially, and they became the go-to space for many individuals during a time when social interaction in a physical setting was not possible. And in-game cooperation with other players is also often essential to achieve advancement, right? And this can help build cooperation skills. We have collaborative experiences with other players when in game. And many of these collaborative experiences often happen with people who perhaps they've never met before or just met once or twice. And that can help to form a social support system of online friends to achieve their collective goal of advancement in the game, which can become a skill. And these are the type of skills that are also directly translatable to working with others in school or work environments, where often you might be in a class setting and are paired with someone who you might have just met for the first time or you don't know. Similar in work, right? You might be working on projects or collaborating with others who you are just meeting for the first time. There is a quantifiable measure of improvement in video games. So improvement is easy. It's easily measured. And as one progresses through these video games, you can see it. You can see it visually. It can look like a bar filling up to show you when you're getting to your next level, right? Getting this XP, experience points that leads to your next level up. It can look like new items being unlocked or additional areas to explore, or you're gaining a new level or a new rank. Based on these quantifiable measures of improvement, individuals who are playing the games can also be ranked on a scoreboard, and then they can compare their scores to others. This is something that's particularly a driving force for engagement in the game for those who really enjoy competition. So I've seen a lot of individuals who play sports competitively or just enjoy competition in general, pursue video games that have this capability within them. So it's important to note that knowing a reward, even one that's kind of expected, like leveling up, will be achieved for the effort and time they spent is also a factor that supports the behavior. Because when we compare that to real life, where leveling up by getting a new job or a promotion or achieving something within your family or friends support groups often doesn't look the same as it might in a video game, where in a video game, there is this concrete identification of when you'll be leveling up. In work, life, or school, the progress and the effort that it takes won't be the same desired effect because there's a greater probability for failure, and the rewards that you get are more abstract than they are in video games. Video games also can provide a sense of autonomy. So when playing a video game, there's often a sense of autonomy where the player is able to choose what games they want to play and how they want to play it. There are a variety of different games to play, like genres, right? They have puzzle games, action games, MMO, RPGs, FSTs, right? real-time strategy games, action games, first-person shooter games, just to name a few genres. So you have these genres that individuals can choose from, and they also have the ability to choose to play as different characters. And in some games, they can develop their own avatar with a backstory. And via creating this avatar, the user has the ability to portray themselves in game as how they imagine to be, or how they might prefer to be, how they aspire to be, or how they're curious to be. And video games allow one to engage with others in game differently than how they might interact in the physical world. Something about the anonymity of being behind a screen when you're interacting with others gives them the possibility to be perhaps a bit more vulnerable, or based on how others are responding to, they might change the way that they interact in the game versus how they interact in the physical world. And that can be a comfort and a coping mechanism for many gamers, especially those who their identity and authentic selves are contrary to the beliefs of the community they live in, and in which it might not be safe for them to express themselves in a physical setting. So they're able to do so in game. And lastly, to understand video gaming behavior, video games also provide a sense of community. The friendships that are formed in game are just one of the many gaming community aspects that are often a big part of gaming culture. And when we're working with individuals and asking them to reduce their gaming time, also consider how the sense of community they've created in game, how being less attached to that might impact their psychosocial functioning as well. Because there are a number of positive experiences, meaningful impacts, and physiological benefits that research has found certain games can have. All right, so how do we screen for gaming disorder? Now that we've talked about the clinical criteria, the co-occurring disorders, these are screening tools that you can use. A research study that was published in 2020 found that there are a number of tools that look at both the clinical criteria for the DSM-5 and the ICD-11. I'm going to skip that and just show them here to you. So here are the three main screening tools from that large extensive review that include the ICD-11 and the World Health Organization's criteria. And feel free to take a screenshot of this as well, or take a photo so you have this information. All of these are very easy to find online. You can put them in Google. Or you can go to Google Scholar as well and find all of these online. So there's the IGD-10, Lemon's IGD-9, and the IGD-S9SF. This is 10 items, 9 items, and 9 items. So they might be good screening tools to include during intake with your intake paperwork. All right, so here I included a bar graph so you can also quickly see the visual points for each of the three screening tools to highlight which of them include the DSM-5 criteria, the ICD-11 criteria, and then the areas of psychosocial impairment, right? There are 5 areas of psychosocial impairment. So the IGD-10 does a great job of having all the DSM-5 criteria, all the ICD-11 criteria, and the psychosocial impairment areas. Lemons just has 8 of the DSM criteria, all 3 of the ICD-11, 1 impairment, and the IGD-SF9 has all of the DSM-5, all of the ICD-11, and then 3 of the 5 psychosocial impairments. Wonderful. So here is the actual screening tool. Again, feel free to take a screen share of this or a photo. And this is how you would administer the IGD-10. The instructions are very clearly outlined here to read the statements below. And this is referring to online games. but it can also refer to game or gaming for the use of sake of simplicity, right? So it could be games that are offline. And this is a fairly easy way of scoring from a 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, or 2 scale for never, sometimes, or often to answer each of these statements. All right, and here is the scoring information. So once the individual you're working with has completed this screening tool, in order to score it, the answers that are never and sometimes are evaluated as the criterion is not met. So never or sometimes is 0 points. If they responded often, now this is 1 point. So the only responses that really count as a point is often. What you'll do is you'll go through and highlight the ones that are often, sum all of those up to see how many points is the total. And knowing that this aligns with the DSM's criteria for gaming disorder, if there is 5 or more of a score, then the criteria is met, right? So consider the case of clinically relevant information if 5 or more criteria are met. So they would be diagnosed with gaming disorder if 5 or more points was the total score. All right, and he can feel free to take a screen share of this one too. This is Lemon's IGD-9 with the 9 questions. These are dichotomous responses, so just a yes or a no. And since the response is a yes or a no, this is one that I would recommend using with adolescents as the scorings, or younger, as adolescents and middle schoolers can respond yes or no with a bit more simplicity than having to respond on this 3-point scale. And these are 9 questions here. And here is the scoring information for Lemon's IGD-9. Again, the scoring is yes and no. Yes would be 1 point, no would be 0 points. You would sum up the total score after completing, after the individual completes the screening tool. And here are actually 3 different ways to score. So if they have a score of 2 or less, it's just recreational or leisure gaming. At risk or at-risk behavior on that continuum of gaming is a score of 2 to 4. And then 5 or more is problematic or gaming disorder. And I know we're running short on time here, so I did want to also share with you, this is the Internet Gaming Disorder Scale short form, the IGD-S9-SF. And again, feel free to take a screen share. Now, this one is a bit more complex to respond, so I would recommend completing this one with the individual. So if you have an intake coordinator, or if you meet with individuals yourself, to ask these questions and then have them respond, because the responses are, as you see here, on a 5-point scale. Never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often. So this is helpful because it also has some clinical utility. If you have scores, even if they don't meet the criteria for gaming disorder, you can always come back in session and discuss the responses and see if there's any change in behavior over time. And here is the scoring information for that, the IGD-S9-SF. Scoring is, again, a 5-point system, so 1 through 5, from never to very often. And then there is a cutoff score. It can range from 9 to 45, with a higher score being indicative of a higher degree of gaming disorder. And feel free to screen share that, take a photo. All right, so for those who are looking, again, as I mentioned, there is an International Gaming Disorder Certificate that includes training and evidence-based approaches. It's 15-hour training that can be found at igccb.org. And here are some additional resources. So these are free anonymous self-screening tools that are available at rebootandrecover.org. We also, of course, have expert clinical assessments and treatments. And lastly, some community resources. So there are support groups that are available for individuals. We have Online Gamers Anonymous, Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous, and Support for Family and Loved Ones at both of these. Alganon uses a 12-step format. This is a just support group format. They have meetings online and in person. And these are the resources for family and loved ones. And that's all we have time for. I think I went over a bit of the time here, but thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Very informative. There was one question. I didn't want to interrupt your role there. That I think it was from Elena, and she asked about the 31-year-old, the age that you hit on with one of the poll questions, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
that I had highlighted too. She asked if that includes gambling online games as well.
Oh, yes. So the ESA really looks primarily at just video games, and they do distinguish between gambling games and video games in their survey data. So it is just video games.
Okay. Yeah, and that was a great question. And in your opinion, just last question, and thank you for today. It was great. Is there clinical significance in that? You know what I'm saying, Stephanie? I mean, if saying if we have someone come to our agency, our practice, and they're doing a lot of online gaming, and some of it's gambling and some of it's just gaming, it's a combination, or it's one or the other. As far as treatment planning and our approach, is there a lot of significance to those differences?
Absolutely. And for those of you who work with clients that have gambling disorder or problematic gambling and are familiar with the criteria and have seen the criteria, you will probably have seen a lot of overlap between the diagnostic criteria for gaming disorder and for gambling disorder. So not only do we see that clinically for the criteria, we're also seeing it anecdotally when working with cases, and we're seeing it on a larger scale through research. There is certainly a convergence between gaming and gambling, and there's a number of components that have been included in recent video games that highlight this convergence between gaming and gambling. And I mean, I can do an entire other presentation just on that topic alone, but yes, you're right. There is that connection there. So just for those of you who are wondering, and thank you for asking, there's definitely convergence.
Okay, well, thank you. And again, thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody that's on. You're getting a lot of great compliments. You might want to take a look in. Yeah, and that's from Kimberly. She's asking about her son, actually. But thank you very much, everyone. And as I was talking with Dr. Stephanie in the pregame talk, she's going to be speaking at the national conference here next month, which I'm looking forward to hopefully hearing. So yep, thank you again, Stephanie. It was great stuff. And I got a lot of questions about certificates 1 and 2, future trainings. Go to weknowthefeeling.org under the trainings tab to see our next training, which is actually June 15th with Dr. Lori Rugel speaking on ASAM. And I believe it's 1 to 3 p.m. Central Standard, but check that time. I apologize. But I'm pretty sure it's 1 to 3. And then the other thing is I'll be sending out a link in the coming day, guys. We're about 5 or 6, honestly, behind on certificates. I know that we're working to get caught up, and I'll get you a link in the coming days. But shoot me an email if you have any questions about those areas. And thank you again, Stephanie. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right. See you guys. Thank you.